Hey everybody, it's Rob. We want to look at the Gaza ceasefire and this peace plan. Is it good news? Well, certainly it's good news. The war has ended. The genocide has ended. Hopefully food's going to get into Gaza quickly. Every second that food does not get in, this is just a great injustice. So it's good news in that sense. Palestinian hostages are going to be freed, or detainees are going to be freed. Israeli hostages are going to be freed. This is good news. Back in 2011, I went to Palestine for a week. I spent a week in Bethlehem. I had a host. She had arranged a series of meetings for me every single day. I would meet with one, two, or three or more leaders within the Palestinian area. My whole goal was I want to hear from you. I need to hear your stories. I can read books, I can do this, and I can do that, but I want to hear from you. What's going on? What's really happening on the ground? I had a local family that I stayed with for that week. It was actually a Muslim family in the old city of Bethlehem, not far from the Church of the Nativity. The young man who was like a nephew who lived down below, he served as my driver for the week. And one night, we're driving around. We dropped the host off back at her place, maybe 10 o'clock at night. And I'm assuming it's a long day. We're going to go back to the house. I'm going to get some sleep. We're all good. All of a sudden, he stops the car and he starts yelling at these two Palestinian young men who come up to the car. And I'm like, am I supposed to be scared right now? What do I? And they're talking in Arabic. I have no idea what they're saying. And these two guys get in the car. And I'm like, oh, okay. And we drive down the street, not very far. We get to, I'm pretty sure it was like a Subway sandwich shop. And we're sitting in the sandwich shop, and these three Palestinian men just told me their stories. They're 28 or so years old, maybe not even 30 years old. They're never going to marry because they're never going to bring a child into this world. They can't see a world where they actually have any hope. And I looked at them and I said, at the time in 2011, there was hope that the Palestinians were going to get some recognition of some kind of recognition before the United Nations. And I said, hey, do you have any hope at all that maybe the United Nations will recognize the Palestinian territories or, some kind of Palestinian sovereignty? And one of the young men looked at me and goes, why should we have any hope? And he went on, he says, look, every time there's an agreement reached, 94, the Oslo Accords, and just listed all these agreements, says, and every time it gets worse. I had nothing I could say. One of the problems with the whole idea of the ceasefire is that Israel has broken every ceasefire that's ever happened so far. So is there any even certainty that once the hostages are released, that this is actually going to end the conflict? I've heard a number of pundits talking this last week about, well, why would Hamas give up the hostages, and why would they release them? The hostages were the only leverage that they had. The hostages were not the only leverage that Hamas had. The problem for Hamas, and I've said repeatedly, by the way, that we condemn Hamas, we condemn what they do, we condemn the terrorist attack on October 7th. I am in no way trying to justify them in any bit whatsoever. But here's the problem. The problem was that the hostages actually provided Israel with a license for the genocide on Gaza. Israel or Netanyahu in particular, could continue its assault on Gaza because the hostages were there. I'm kind of wonder, and I know many officials who are in the know really wonder if Netanyahu really wanted to do this because Ben Gvir and Smotrich, his right-wing members of his cabinet, they wanted the annihilation of Gaza. They wanted it ethnically cleansed. They wanted Gaza to be completely settled. You can read Ben Gvir and Smotrich's statements. I mean, this is happening in late 2023, a month or two after the October 7th terrorist attack. Smotrich and Ben Gvir were at a rally with a bunch of Israeli youth saying, settlement is our only option. Settlement is our only option. They wanted to ethnically cleanse Gaza, get all the Palestinians out there and settle it themselves. The reason why there's a need for a ceasefire today is because the ceasefire that Trump brokered right before he entered office in January was broken by Israel. Here's an AP article back a number of months ago. Why did Netanyahu end the Gaza ceasefire? The current ceasefire is needed because Israel ended the previous one. That previous ceasefire had actually made provisions for all the hostages to be released. They were going to be released in stages. Some of them were released. Some of the Palestinian detainees were released. And then Israel said, no, we want all the hostages now. In fact, Trump even said at the time, unless Hamas releases all the hostages within 24 hours, there's going to be hell to pay. Now, Trump reiterated this last week that if Hamas doesn't agree to this particular deal, there's going to be hell to pay. Mr. President, I'm not sure what more hell they can pay. I mean, is that a threat that they really, seriously, look at what's happened to Gaza. They've already paid hell. What are you going to do to them? So can there be any certainty that this ceasefire is going to hold? No, there can't be any ceasefire. Now, let's be clear, by the way, Hamas did not agree to all the provisions of this particular deal. The idea that, well, Hamas has agreed, the Palestinians have agreed, the Arab countries around the world have agreed. Hamas said in this recent, what they agreed to over the last couple of days was, we will agree to the exchange of hostages to ending the war. Let's have a ceasefire. But Hamas said, we are not going to govern Gaza. We're done. And because we're done, we are not going to negotiate what the rest of this deal is going to look like, because somebody else is going to have to come in and do the work. We're going to let them negotiate it. So all that's been negotiated, the 20 points of Trump's plan, is just simply phase number one. And phase number one is ending the war, ending the genocide, and beginning to exchange these hostages or detainees. This brings up a very important point, and that is, peace is not the absence of violence, but the presence of justice. I was on a conference call maybe within 10 days after the October 7th, 2023 terrorist attack with some leading experts from Gaza and from the Palestinian areas in the West Bank. And during the presentation, they were talking about what was going on. The water had been shut off, the gas had been shut off, electricity had been shut off, food had been shut off. What were the people of Gaza going to do? And they were talking about the conflict and what they were expecting, how this was not going to go well. And someone asked them the question. They said, listen, well, what do you do with Hamas? I mean, Israel has to eliminate and destroy Hamas. And one of the leaders said, you give us justice and we will take care of Hamas. The problem is not the ending of violence. The problem is the need for justice. Now, let me be clear. I am not trying to defend Hamas and its activities, but the Palestinians and Hamas is a resistance movement. And a resistance movement takes place because of injustice. I, by the way, am amazed that the Palestinians have not resorted to arms even more than they have. The overwhelming majority of the Palestinians have been intensely peaceful. The Palestinian Christians have been nonviolent since the beginning, since long before this. They've been one of the leading advocates of nonviolence. And I mean, I do not believe in violence. I'm not a pacifist. I believe in nonviolent resistance, kind of like Martin Luther King Jr. and Gandhi. I think that's the way of Jesus. You know, Jesus says in Matthew 26:52, all who live by the sword will die by the sword. But I'm telling you, I don't know what I would do if my home was bombed and I'm pulling my children out of the rubble, my grandchildren out of the rubble, my wife out of the rubble. What would I do? Well, I hope I would, but I don't know what I would do. Can you imagine the trauma of these people, and how have they not resorted to more violence? Now, this leads to my second point. The second point is that the underlying causes for Palestinian resistance have not been addressed. You've ended the genocide. You've ended the conflict in terms of the current war. We got some detainees that are going to be released. But is there any hope for sustainability and viability for the Palestinian people? There doesn't appear to be. In the weeks after, within a couple of weeks after the October 7th massacre and the terrorist attack in 2023, I had about 13 live streams over the course of 2.5 weeks. And one of those live streams was with Greg Khalil. Greg's a great friend. I've known him for a number of years now. He was actually a legal advisor to the PLO from 2004 to 2008. The significance of those dates is that Israel withdrew from Gaza. If you're not aware, Israel had settlers in Gaza. Very difficult, hard to maintain, very violent issue. It was just not a good thing, and it cost Israel too much money and so they wanted to withdraw the settlers. And so Greg was involved with Condoleezza Rice in the United States delegation under Bush, with two-star generals in the United States, with Tony Blair in the British delegation. Greg was in the negotiating room, and he said, we knew then that when Israel pulled out in 2005, that they were not leaving the conditions in Gaza where it was sustainable. They were not providing the people of Gaza sustainability. No flourishing was going, no freedom and no economic freedom. It was not economically viable. We knew then there was a ticking time bomb. So the problem is, well, this current deal, we don't know the details of what's going to happen in phase 2, phase 3, phase 4, if they even hold to phase 2, phase 3, phase 4. But what we don't have any indication of is that there's actually any clue that there's going to be a Palestinian sovereignty. There's nothing right now. The plan for Gaza is for Trump and Tony Blair and some Palestinian voices to have authority over the Gaza Strip for who knows how long. But none of that has a plan for Palestinian sovereignty. And in fact, Netanyahu has stated explicitly 2 weeks ago, there will not be a Palestinian state. Now, because this particular video is actually speaking in Hebrew and there's subtitles, I know some of you might not be watching the video, but might be listening. I'm going to go ahead and read the subtitles just in case you're not watching.
יש לי מסר ברור
I have a clear message for those
לאותם
leaders who
מנהיגים
recognize a
שמכירים
Palestinian
במדינה
state
פלסטינית
after the horrific massacre
לאחר
on October
הטבח הנורא
7th.
ב-7 באוקטובר. אתם
You are giving a
מעניקים
huge reward
פרס
to
עצום
terrorism.
לטרור. ויש לי מסר
I have
נוסף
another
עבורכם.
message for you.
זה לא יהיה.
It will not happen.
לא תקום
A
מדינה
Palestinian state will
פלסטינית
not be
ממערב
established
לירדן.
west of the Jordan River.
Amen.
So there we have it. Netanyahu has himself acknowledged 2 weeks ago, there will not be a Palestinian state. Ben-Gvir, Smotrich, his right-wing coalition and his cabinet, they're not going to allow for this. So if that's the case, there's no viability for the Palestinian people. Now, back in 2022, I wrote a series of posts. The first post I wrote was in May of 2022, and the idea was that the status quo in Israel-Palestine is not the status quo. I wrote 7 posts over the course of the next few months until August of 2022 saying, what's happening? This is in 2022. There was no war or conflict going on per se. I said, what's happening now is status quo. But the status quo meant that Israel continued to build settlements. Over more and more time, they were taking more and more land from the Palestinians in the West Bank. Gaza was continued to be unsustainable. And what that meant then was that this is not going to last. You're simply not creating the situation and the conditions of viability. And if you're not creating the conditions of viability, and if over time it becomes worse and worse and worse for the Palestinians, then we're just creating another ticking time bomb. We have not provided. So Hamas might be out of the picture, but what's going to stop another Palestinian resistance move from eventually rising up? And if they don't rise up, you're eventually looking at the destruction of the Palestinian people. Now, this here is a map of the West Bank as it stands today. And these green areas are basically Palestinian-controlled areas. The reality is, I keep hearing people talk about a two-state solution, and this is going to lead to a two-state solution. There's nothing in the Trump peace plan that even calls for a two-state solution. Hamas didn't even agree to anything beyond phase number 1. We have not got anywhere near that. But a two-state solution is unviable. It's been unviable for almost 10 years. I was in Washington, D.C. in 2015. Obama and his Secretary of State, I think John Kerry, were negotiating with the Palestinian leaders, with Israel, trying to come up with a viable two-state solution. It didn't look like it was going to happen. We then got a briefing. Kerry himself wasn't able to come to our briefing, but one of his leaders came and gave us a briefing. It's like, it's not looking good. And the reality, everyone knew at that time, if they did not get a sustainable solution, then it would be unviable. And here's the reason why. Because all you have is a whole bunch of little Bantustans. The Palestinian territories are just isolated Bantustans. You can't go from Bethlehem to Jerusalem. You can't go from Jerusalem to Ramallah without going through Israeli-controlled areas. These are settlers who live all throughout all here. 750,000 Israelis. Actually, the land that's not green is controlled by Israel and controlled by settlers. You're not going to kick those settlers out. They're too established. Some of them have lived there for many, since the 60s. It's not going to happen. So this raises the question, where do we go from here? Well, we'll talk to some leading experts. Stay tuned to the Determined Truth YouTube page. Make sure you subscribe, click the alerts button, the little bell, so you get notified when other live streams come up. We have a live stream next Thursday with Mako Nagasawa on fascism. The link for that is on the Determined Truth YouTube page, but you can also find it on the determinedtruth.com homepage under the events tab. As we get a live stream scheduled with hopefully some experts over the next few weeks, we will notify you and alert you. Of course, one of the best ways to stay in touch with us is to subscribe to the Determined Truth newsletter. Go to our contact page. If you actually fill out that page, you're going to get a copy of one of the chapters of one of my recent books, Land of Contention. So thank you so much for your support. Let's keep this conversation going. Let's hear your comments in the comments box. Please be civil in the comments box, but we want to hear what's going on, and we'll do our best to interact with them.